So welcome to another episode of the Privileged Man podcast with Sir Andrew Strauss. Straussy was a legendary England cricket captain, becoming one of only 3 Englishmen to win the Ashes both in England and Australia. I start off the podcast getting in as much cricket trivia as possible before settling into a deeper conversation on how Andrew dealt with the tragically early death of his beloved wife Ruth and the legacy it ultimately and stunningly created through the Ruth Strauss Foundation. Andrew's openness and vulnerability to talk about his grief is remarkably courageous, and I'm hugely grateful to him for coming on the podcast and modelling this type of leadership. If you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe, give us 5 stars, leave a review, and share episodes on your social channels. The more the podcast is listened to, the bigger the impact and the more men we can support. Now, on to the main event. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us here on the Privileged Man podcast.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to it.
Absolute honour. Absolute honour. Well, I thought for the cricket fans out there, I would start off with some quick fire cricket questions, and then we'll get into the more meaty bones of life questions after that. How's that?
Okay. Yeah, let's strike while the iron's hot. No easy introduction for me then, by the looks of things.
No, sorry, straight into it. What was your best moment?
Holding up the Ashes in Sydney 2010-11, or January 2011 it was, actually.
Awesome. Yeah, good moment. I was there 2 years later. It wasn't quite the same experience.
Didn't work quite the same way, did
it? Worst moment?
2006 Ashes, that game in Adelaide where Australia sort of somehow managed to beat us out of an impregnable position. An awful moment.
Biggest rivalry? Personal rivalry?
Morne Morkel bowled at me, so I don't think he would see me as much as a rival, but I had a lot of sleepless nights thinking about him.
Right. How about Murray? Was he not up there?
Murray?
Yeah.
I mean, I think probably actually Shane Warne, if I could go back on that, probably Warne would be up there, but he finished in 2006. For a lot of my career, I didn't play against him. But yeah, Warne and Murray both equally hard, but Warney, of course, had that incredible sort of charisma, and you sort of worked the crowd, so to speak, and that was very, very challenging facing him.
Yeah, right. And did you face Akhtar, Shoaib Akhtar?
I did, yeah, quite a few times. Yeah, that wasn't fun either.
Favourite ground?
Lords, simple, home ground. I had so many amazing matches there, amazing memories, and some memorable performances, sort of personally as well.
Yeah, I remember watching a few. And with that said, it seems to be a thing that when I go to Lords, which I'm a member of the MCC, luckily, England seems to struggle. Is that just me, or is that an actual thing?
I think traditionally we have... I don't think we've necessarily struggled. I think we've struggled against Australia there, mainly. But yeah, look, I definitely feel like other teams come there, and for a lot of them, it feels like one and only time to play at Lords. And I suppose that can either over-egg you, so to speak, in terms of your emotions, or it can get you in a really good mindset to play well. And I suppose for a lot of those players, it seems to bring out the best in them. But yeah, I mean, our record when I was playing was pretty good there, really. So I think maybe that's overplayed to a certain degree. And we struggled against the Aussies there. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I remember watching, you guys... You particularly against Glenn McGrath back in the 2000s. That'd be right in saying?
Yeah, 2005. Yeah, when we got knocked over. Yeah.
Then he rolled his ankle, didn't he? Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. It was nothing to do with that. The win. We'll just gloss over that point. Greatest influence in cricket?
Probably Justin Langer, actually. He was a sort of mentor of mine early days at Middlesex when he was captain and overseas player, and yeah, I think he just really sort of instilled in me what it would take to become an international cricketer, and you had to sort of separate yourself from the culture of county cricket, really. And I think if I hadn't had that, I don't think I would have done it, quite frankly.
That's quite a statement about county cricket in itself.
Well, it certainly was back then, yeah. Yeah, that is for sure. I mean, I think very sort of comfortable, people not wanting to be out of their comfort zone too much. Not really, almost if you were seen to be really keen to progress, then that would be slightly frowned upon. That was the sort of prevailing culture back then. I think it is a lot better now, but it's still not as good as I think it could be. And certainly when you go to Australia, and other parts of the world, you do sense a more desperation to get better and to be the best that they can be.
Wow, super interesting. I could do a whole podcast, obviously, about cricket, but I'll keep racing on. Hardest decision on the field?
Well, certainly, I mean, I don't remember any being particularly hard, but I do remember the toss on Boxing Day in 2010, where it was that all the stats said it was a sort of bat first ground at the MCG. You know, Boxing Day, 98,000 people there, and it was a bit overcast, but the weather forecast was for it to get better as the day went on. And so really there was a lot to take in there. And I think our bowlers were telling us that we should bat first. And I sort of went against everyone and decided to bowl first. And we bowled them out for 98 and we were 157 for none at the end of the play. So it was one of those that came off. But I remember at the time going, this is a high risk one. If this doesn't work, this is the Ashes that could be gone. So, it's those moments where you've really got to sort of back yourself and try and make the decision you make the right one, like just commit to it fully. Luckily, it came off.
Was that totally your decision, or was there a committee of what to do?
I think there are a few people that sort of try and influence you one way or the other, but I think it was equally split on that occasion. So, it's one of those that I was going to say that's why I get paid the big bucks, but I don't think I got paid nearly as much as I do now. But you have those moments as captain where it's tricky.
I was going to say then, the hardest decision off the field.
Well, I think, if I'm honest, I think the decision to retire when I did, I think that felt really hard because I knew what a big decision it was, and I was still playing well enough. I could still go on for another couple of years. So for me, I think it was one that sort of tortured me for a while, actually, as I suppose all retirements do one way or another. But for me in particularly, I found that hard. I felt myself really sort of pulled between my need and desire and want to be around for my kids and obviously my sort of obligations to English cricket. And that's always a tricky sort of, mental kind of procedure to go through to figure out what comes out first.
How old were you when you retired?
I think I was 34.
So compared to Jimmy, you're a spring chicken.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, he's obviously the outrider in all of this. Nothing of what he's done makes sense to anyone, quite frankly, especially as a bowler. But I think what's that shown is he's retained the motivation and the desire and the hunger and all that sort of stuff you need to be a performer at the top level. And he's been brilliant with lucky with his body in a way as well. But I'd certainly got to a stage where I felt like I'd pretty much achieved everything I wanted to in the game. And so I was worried that I was going to keep doing it potentially for the wrong reasons, which were money and whatever, which is not the right reasons to be playing cricket for England.
Did you have an immediate plan after that?
Not specifically, no. I mean, I always wanted to sort of give myself a bit of time, and I knew that I'd probably get some opportunities with Sky doing the commentary stuff, but I just wanted to sort of get away from it all and put my career to bed. So I sort of wrote my autobiography and then start the next chapter. But I'm sure we'll get into it later. That wasn't an easy process, and I don't think it is for anyone actually. Coming to terms with it really felt like grief actually. The death of a career at the age of 35 or whatever. It was a hard process to go through.
When you talk about grief, I guess that brings up the 5 stages of grief. And, the first one being denial that it's actually happening. And the second one being angry. Were you sort of at times angry potentially with yourself for doing it too early? Were there times sort of in the years after where you sort of look back and went, I shouldn't have done that? I could have kept going. No, I
never regretted that decision. And I think I was lucky because that was a decision that I got to make. I mean, most cricketers don't have the opportunity to make that decision. It gets made for them. So that was not a problem. I think sometimes it was quite shocking is probably not the right word, but it was surprising how quickly you're forgotten about, so to speak, having been such a sort of integral part of things. And then the show rolls on, doesn't it? And that's the same for everyone. But I suppose when you do give your heart and soul to something and it means so much to you and you almost have a sort of surrogate family there when you're away on tour. It's quite a hard thing to suddenly be on the outside and nothing's ever the same again. Like, it's a very different relationship you have with everyone. And of course, the team, rightly, has to move on. And there's no point in them worrying about or pining for someone that was in the team previously, because that's not constructive. So I think that sort of really hit home in the sort of 6 months or so after I retired.
And brings me on to this thought I had earlier. Are you aware of people going, that's Andrew Strauss, he used to be England cricket captain? Do you ever get used to that? Do you ever get used to the fame?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think fame's probably the wrong word for me, really. I mean, I do get recognised occasionally, but, people always almost exclusively very respectful. And it's a great feeling to know that people, you brought some joy to people's lives or whatever, or there were some memorable moments that will stick with them for a long time. So I think if you ask Ed Sheeran or someone or what fame's like, I think he might have a different answer to me. But, I think cricketers have always been lucky in this country that, number one, that we are recognised, but number two, that we're not like footballers that it's so kind of intense that you can't go about your daily business as you would otherwise. And certainly cricketers in India would be in that category where, they've almost got to sort of shut themselves off from the real world to one degree or another.
Yeah, sure. I think you're famous. I mean, you're certainly famous in my household. And just bringing in that sort of sense of what you did afterwards, how did the ECB role come about?
Well, I mean, you might remember that England went over to Australia and got whacked, and then the 2015 World Cup came along and they got whacked badly in that as well. And so as a result of that, Tom Harrison, who's the CEO at the time, made the decision to change the director of cricket and effectively approached me and said, look, I think you're the right person to do this. I'd love you to do it, et cetera, et cetera. And so I had a bit of a decision to make there because I was having quite an easy, cushy life, doing a bit for Sky and having quite a lot of time at home and et cetera, et cetera. But there was obviously an itch that needed to be scratched for me. I felt like I was getting a bit frustrated being on the outside and telling people what I thought England should do. And I felt like, I need to stand up and try and do that myself. And in doing so, I felt like it was going to be a really good learning experience for me. And so, so after a bit of umming and ahhing and sort of making sure the family was all right with it, then, I came on as director of cricket between 2015 to the back end of 2018.
And what did you feel was like your biggest achievement in that time?
Well, the one thing we were focused on was winning the 2019 World Cup. Like, that was the thing that was keeping us all up at night. That was what we had a specific sort of plan and set of processes towards. And so I really feel like with that goal in mind, we really transformed white ball cricket in this country. And I only played a very small part in that. And Owen Morgan and Trevor Bayliss and all those players that came in, they're the ones that deserve the plaudits. But I think to shift mindset, approach, confidence, and to go from a really kind of consistently poor white ball team to the number one team in the world and then winning the 2019 World Cup was an extraordinary performance by so many people. And I was glad to have been able to play my part in that.
Yeah. Amazing. I mean, it certainly worked for 2019, didn't it? I thought something happened in the last 4 years, didn't it? That didn't
but sport never stays the same. I think that's the point, isn't it? That, it's a very dynamic thing. And the moment you feel like you've got it cracked, you're probably on the downside already. And maybe that's where we got to over the course of this World Cup.
But do you think it was something to do with the preparation? I heard something along the lines of how much white ball cricket had been played to 2015 to 2019 compared to 19 to 23. And I'm sure that had something to do with the pandemic.
Yeah, I think so. But it's also very hard to focus on two things at the same time. I think while we were very focused on winning the 2019 World Cup, I think probably we slightly took our eyes off the ball with Test cricket. You could argue over the last couple of years or so, we've done the opposite, which has been very focused on Test cricket and had some extraordinary successes there. Perhaps almost by default, that means less attention going on white ball cricket. The challenge is to be able to do both at the same time, which annoyingly Australia have been able to do quite a lot over the last 30 years or so. And obviously India have got such depth now that they're able to do that as well.
Yeah, it is extraordinary how Australia seemed to just pull it out culturally how it is over there, but they weren't expected this time round, were they? And suddenly they're coming through and beating India in front of whatever it was, 100,000. Incredible achievement.
I know, it's highly irritating, isn't it? Very irritating. Anyway, they must be doing something right.
It is, well, right. But I mean, isn't that how we came out of the 90s? I mean, growing up watching cricket in the 90s was not exactly inspirational stuff. And then wasn't the model to look at Australia and look at the academies and then actually bring it back?
Yeah, I think there was a bit of that, actually. In fact, there was a lot of it. I think we were doing a lot of navel gazing, going, the 1990s was England's worst performing decade ever. And so the early 2000s was like, this can't go on anymore. And there was a template there that was set by Australia around their academy, etc. I think English cricket hardened up to a certain degree. I think over probably the last 15 years or so, we've got a little bit more confident in doing it our own way and not just copying the Aussies. But, we're still held back by various structural issues in the game. I don't want to bore the listeners on this podcast, but, the truth is we play too much cricket. There's not enough, too much dilution in terms of our top cricketers. So the standard's not high enough. And we're performing with one arm tied behind our back. There's no doubt about it.
And you were very generous towards the light, going back towards the success of 2019, Owen Morgan and Trevor Bayliss, etc., and all the other players, and you said it was to do with them. Was that around the time that you were knighted, I think?
Well, I got knighted actually in 2019. So, I think that was after I obviously gave up the position and after Ruth died as well. So, I think it was definitely after the first red for Ruth. And so it was a bit of a combination, I think, of cricket exploits and charity, I think.
Okay, interesting. I was going to ask, from a cricketing point of view, did you feel worthy of it, of that title and of that gong?
Well, I just think no one ever feels worthy of it. I mean, no is a simple answer, not at all. When you go to Buckingham Palace and you're picking up your gong, you realise those people that are surrounding you, what a contribution they've made to society. And there you are, someone who's just like whacked a leather ball around for a bit. It doesn't feel quite right, to be honest with you. But at the same time, if someone thinks you're worthy to receive it, it's a very humbling and honouring experience to be able to have that bestowed upon you.
We'll come back to Ruth and the foundation in a moment, but just all of that crescendoing, I guess, to that point in your life, do you feel that going to Caldicott, going to Radley, the upbringing that you had, getting to and then coming through to being England captain, do you think that was an advantage, or do you feel that it was a disadvantage?
Huge advantage.
Right.
Huge. Yeah, I think in all sorts of different ways. Not an advantage necessarily in, me being a great person or anything, but I think in terms of preparing you for being in a team environment, being very independent, being away from home for long periods of time, certainly as a captain, speaking in public and not being afraid to lead, the sort of grounding that I had in my sort of technique and everything that I went through my schooling with, and also dealing with emotions, or not dealing with them in a way, like keeping them locked up, I think really helped me in international sport. There's no doubt about it. It didn't set me up particularly well to deal with Ruth's illness, quite frankly, and her death. But I think for an international sportsman, unfortunately, I know more and more people, mental health become more and more of a topic and more acceptable for people to talk about it. But there is still a prevailing attitude and maybe even necessity in top level sport for you to suck it up and get on with it. Because as soon as you sort of let it out, it's quite hard to put it back in again, if that makes sense. And so that's why I think you find a lot of top sports people that are privately tortured, but publicly pretend everything is fine.
Right. And as we've seen in the news lately, Owen Farrell, for example, on the rugby side of it, or a couple of years back now, but Ben Stokes, what I find interesting about that is the way in which he's come back and the sort of freedom of expression he's had and sort of almost instilled in the team through being seemingly carefree about, I don't want to quote him, I don't want to get his words wrong, but not caring as much about the result, but actually the way in which he does it and going about that, and the freedom of self sort of almost comes out in the freedom of the way that he and the team are playing.
Yeah, I mean, Ben's a very unique individual on so many different levels. And I think, firstly, that is his character. He is a bit more of a free spirit. Secondly, as an all-rounder, I think he gives you've got two bites of the cherry all the time. And thirdly, he was someone that never really reacted well to being constrained and contained. And so when he got the captaincy, it was absolutely right. He did it his way, and the combination with McCullum has been an absolute genius move by Rob Key to bring them in together. And I think absolutely right. Top level sport, often you're battling with yourself, and often you're battling with the fear of failure. And to sort of remove that for the players has been, you have to go the full hog on that. Like, you can't half do it. And for them to commit to it in such a way, been revelationary, hasn't it? And it goes to show that at the top level, it's not to do with technique or anything. It's to do with mindset all the time. It comes back to how you're feeling about yourself, how able you are to control your emotions, how able you are to deal with fear, and also having the sort of the freedom and the space in your mind to be able to do it over a period of time and not just doing it once. That consistency is such a big part of it as well.
So if I can just pick up on what you're just saying, that from a sports point of view, you probably give some credit of your success to actually being able to lock up your emotions, but in a personal way. And when your wife died, that didn't actually set you up for, I guess, if it can be a success at all for anyone. Of course, it's very difficult. But how did you deal with that? I mean, I guess the question I've got is like, what is it like to know that your wife is going to die?
Yeah, well, look, you talk about those stages of grief, and there was a lot of denial there. Well, yeah, I know that's what the diagnosis is, but one day at a time, and these things can go on for a long period, and let's not worry about what might happen in the future, and really sort of just keep that elephant in the room tucked in the corner somewhere and crack on like I've always done. I think that's what my intention was to begin with, and obviously take some time off work and etc. But I think over the period of the year or so after a diagnosis, I think a few things happened. Number one, Ruth really felt like for her to enjoy the rest of the time she had on this earth, she had to prepare me and the boys for what was to come, and that meant us going to see a counsellor, this amazing woman, Jenny Thomas, who really facilitated those really very tough conversations you have to have, firstly between Ruth and I, and then between us and the kids as well. And then also, once that dialogue started, it allowed both of us to talk a bit more freely about how we were feeling. And of course, as we got to the back end of Ruth's life, there was a ramping up, the dial sort of ramped up in terms of the emotional element. And that was, as sad as it was and as difficult as it was also, there was some really special stuff there around us both understanding and appreciating what's important, what's not important, maybe communicating more effectively together, being more open and honest with each other, and both wanting to, in what Ruth's words, do death well. And so that was the focus for us. And, when she did die in December 2018, I feel like we were kind of mainly able to achieve that, however painful it was. And then that's one thing. And then there's, of course, the reality of two boys with their mum not around anymore, and me having to play mum and dad and trying to work out what this new chapter in our lives looked like. That was an incredibly tough time. But I think up to Ruth's death, it was more about just embracing and savouring the moment and staying in the present as much as we could.
Thanks for sharing that. So that was the counselling together. But how did you find support, or how did you share the sort of, I guess, the sadness and pain that you were in? Who would you go to sort of have those conversations? Or did you do the professional sportsman thing and lock it up? Or did you have friends or family that you spoke to, or a group? Or
I definitely found myself yearning to speak to people that had been through it before, something similar before. So, in a lot of cases, my friends and family, while they wanted to help, couldn't really help. Like I wanted to know what people had learnt and what was going to be difficult coming up. And I just feel like people can give the most well-meaning advice, but it's like someone who's never driven a car telling you how to drive a car. Like it's pointless, isn't it, in a way? Yeah, so there were various people that I came into contact with who'd been through something similar. Jenny, the counsellor, I went and saw very regularly, and she was beyond helpful. And then, there's a lot of, I also did quite a lot of reading and jotting down thoughts. And I've never been the sort of person that would get emotional in public, particularly. The emotional stuff that I did have, I did mainly in private. But obviously one of the things I was trying to sort of instill with the boys was that they had permission to feel angry or sad or whatever they felt. I wanted them to know they had permission to voice that. And so I had to sort of try and role model that at home, which I was trying to do, So if I was sad or angry, I'd say, look, I had a really tough day today, etc. So, we were trying to do the opposite of that kind of stoic, stiff upper lip, like, let's not talk about any of this ever again. Yeah, so that's what I was trying to do. I don't think I always did it successfully, but that was definitely the intent.
Was there permission to cry?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I mean, I cried a lot in front of the boys. That they cried themselves. One of my boys sort of did it a bit more than the other, but no issues with that. And I think Ruth was always very good at that as well. So it's a huge part, I think, of dealing with grief is to be able to let that emotion out in some way. And it's interesting, when people are sort of talking about people that are going through grief, they will often go, oh, you know what, that person's doing really well. They're cracking on with life, they're moving forwards. It's amazing how unaffected they are. Isn't that great? And then there are other people that are a bit down and depressed and crying and are sort of stuck in the loss. People go, oh, that person's really struggling. But actually, the truth is that neither one of those is right. You need a bit of both. And certainly the ones that don't show any emotion and just crack on with life are probably the most vulnerable, actually, because they're the ones that are just not pretending it never happened, right? And not dealing with anything. And at some stage, that's going to hit them like a ton of bricks. My counsellor talked very much about dealing with the grief, like being sort of loss orientated and restorative. And you need to have a balance of both of those. You can't over-index on one without having the other.
Did you go into any kind of depressive behaviours as well, of sort of avoidance?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been very lucky in that regard. I've never been depressive or depressed. I think that it's hard for me to actually understand what that is, actually. I was sad, but there was no time where I was like, I can't get out of the house, and that sort of darkness came over. I just never had that. I suppose I'm just very lucky that's not in my makeup, I suppose.
But it's amazing credit to the healing as well that you did through that process that, as you said, you got to deal with. Otherwise it comes back and snaps you further down the line.
Yeah, and I think it wasn't a linear thing. Like there was a period probably about 12 months or so ago where I went through a really tough patch where it's kind of like I was quite angry with a lot of people for whatever reason, and that was sort of delayed grief coming out, I think, and there were a couple of things that triggered that for me, but never kind of like, I mean, I wasn't in a great place, I think, at that point, but I don't think it was depressive. I think it was, as I said, it was just a sort of delayed onset of grief, and sometimes it's hard to articulate or think about this stuff because it kind of hits you before you know what's actually happening here. And that's obviously the real challenge. To be proactive about it, it's not easy.
And do you continue to go to counselling? Is it a continued thing, or is it sort of...
Less frequently now, but I do still occasionally, yeah. And a bit more probably wrongly when I feel in not a great place. You should probably do it a bit more regularly than that. But I feel like I'm sort of relatively self-sufficient now. I've sort of got, a way of doing things, a way with dealing things that I think stands me in reasonable stead.
And how was you talked about playing the mum and dad? How was particularly playing that sort of more feminine role that was obviously a huge gap after Ruth's death?
Yeah. Honestly, I think I really struggled with that. I think I was okay being around for the boys and doing drop-offs and pickups and generally sort of, making meals and all that sort of stuff, I think I was fine at. Just that kind of maternal kind of being there for them emotionally when they needed it, I was less good at. And certainly, it's interesting because when I look back at my relationship with Ruth, I think we sort of tag teamed that stuff so well. But it's very hard to react to something in a way that's not natural to you. So, if the boys really needed comfort or whatever, there'd be a lot of times where I'd be like, come on, mate, just get on with it type thing. Or I'd be thinking that. But of course, often mums are just really good at that, kind of like making them feel supported and heard and et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think I've been brilliant at that, if I'm honest. I think the boys have, given me extraordinary support, which is something that I didn't think would happen, actually. I was surprised by how much support they gave me. And we've learned to do things differently. And I think the boys have got a couple of friends of Ruth's who've played a very sort of maternal role for them. Sometimes it's even just mums of friends or whatever. Like, there've been certain people that they've been able to connect with on that level, which has helped a lot.
Amazing. So they sort of, during the last 5 years, you guys have done things mostly in the sort of paternal sense. And what have you like really enjoyed doing with them? Playing golf?
A lot of that, yeah. Holidays generally have been great. Like, I think one of the things that I felt was we need to go away a lot. Like, I think it's a get out of Dodge for a bit and give ourselves space to think. School is so busy and, work is busy. And so just having those moments to be able to sit back and remember Ruth and have conversations with each other. I mean, it's just such a hard thing to do and on the day-to-day kind of roller coaster that you're on. So a lot of holidays, doing some like one-on-one stuff with the boys. Yeah, look, I mean, I think we've just formed a lovely little team, the boys and me, that in a way that our situation is unique and therefore our team is unique. And yeah, we look out for each other. And it's obviously changing because the boys are getting older now and my oldest has just turned 18 and, things will evolve and change. But we kind of, obviously Ruth's death has brought us all much closer together. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, amazing. Like it's what can come out of such sadness, right? I mean, that's the other. I guess it's the way you have to look at life, isn't it? To be positive about it rather than what we don't have.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. Yeah, I think you've got to, you got to put your front foot forward and move on in life and make the best of it. And as you say, if there are positives that can come out of it, let's try and sort of focus on them. And of course, I think in the early days after Ruth died, the sort of founding of the Ruth Strauss Foundation and the developing of that, I think that really helped me and probably helped quite a few people in and around, Ruth's friends and family, et cetera, to know that there was this sort of focal point to move forwards to. And that's still the case today. I mean, 5 years down the line, it's still such a passionate thing for me and the boys and everyone involved in the foundation for it to be a worthwhile legacy for Ruth and, making sure we're sort of executing on what it was she wanted that foundation to do.
Right, which was doing death well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Doing death well, helping families go through grief, raising awareness and knowledge sharing into non-smoking lung cancer. Those were the things that she'd written down on that little piece of paper when we discussed setting up a foundation. And so those are our guiding principles as a foundation. And then it's not just what we do, it's how we do it and how we are as a foundation. Very, very keen to make sure that Ruth's spirit sort of runs through every pore of the foundation and that it doesn't get sort of sidetracked to being something it isn't. So that's something we're working very hard on.
Amazing. And how many families have you helped to date? Do you have that kind of data?
Well, it's hard to put a number on. Thousands. I mean, we've obviously, we help families directly through our family support service. So that is our practitioners helping them and preparing those families to have those tough conversations. But then through training up healthcare professionals that, they're working with hundreds of families every year, each one of them. So, yeah, I mean, hopefully that's many thousands. And we're just starting a project which is training up sort of staff in schools to be able to provide that support for kids as well. So just trying to cast our net further and further. But it's still a drop in the ocean. There are 40,000 kids every year that are going to lose a parent, and nowhere near helping all of them. So there's a long way to go still.
Yeah, a very valuable drop in the ocean. It's amazing what's being achieved, and how you do it was. I was going to ask you. Red for Ruth Day at Lord's, which is, I mean, incredibly powerful and I guess emotionally charged around the ground. How do you, honestly, with 36, 37,000 people all dressed in red, how do you hold it together? I mean, it's quite an event, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, and certainly the first year just absolutely blew me away. I just, I couldn't register or really come to terms with it in any way, shape or form. Over the years, you become a bit more used to it and becomes a bit more of a bit more routine. I think that's probably not the right word to describe it, but it's still a very emotional time. I feel myself sort of tensing up in the lead up to it. And then you've got sort of 5 days where you're kind of on show and on display, and you're trying to sort of have the right conversations with people and trying to make as big an impact as you can. But it does feel very much in performance mode. And then it finishes and you sort of crumple in a heap somewhere. That's kind of the way it works. And obviously it's always worthwhile, and we're just blown away by the support that we continue getting from the cricket family. But I mean, it's a big week. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I'm sure. And how much has been raised in the last, I guess there have been 4 summers, is it? 4 summers since?
So yeah, out of Red for Ruth, that's a good question. Probably we'd be well over £3 million now out of those events. And then obviously we do other events as well. So I mean, it's extraordinary. So, those are people digging very deep into their pockets at a time, which it's not easy to do so. But I suppose they wouldn't do it if the cause didn't resonate with people. And, it's such an extraordinary thing, the number of people that have come up to me who might be in their 60s or 70s and come up and just go, look, I love what you're doing. My parents died when I was 12, 15, 10. And it was never spoken about again. And it's affected me all my life. And so people really need this help and support to do it differently. And so every time I hear that, it just gives me more motivation to extend our reach and to get to places that perhaps we haven't got to yet, because unfortunately it's just happening to too many people. And that's not going to change anytime soon. There's only going to be more people, unfortunately. So we need to try and be there for as many of them as we can be.
Yeah, I mean, expressions on the other side of depression. And when people can actually start to talk this stuff through with people who understand it or have been through it, the weight comes off the shoulders, right? And the world just feels a lighter place.
Yeah, that is so true. Yeah, that is so true. And I think, so often people don't know where to turn to. And it probably is not unlike depression in a way, that you feel like you've got nowhere to go. You're sort of boxed in, and especially if you're the sort of surviving parent, like there's so much for you to do. Like it's very hard to do and to give yourself space to think and process at the same time. And so, yeah, the better families are prepared for what's to come, hopefully the easier that process becomes when the eventuality does occur. It's never going to be easy, but hopefully it is that much easier.
Sure. And so if people want to know more about the foundation, where should they go?
Yeah, so just ruthstraussfoundation.com is the best place. We've got loads of stuff, loads of information on there, details on events and how to support, etc. as well. But a lot of it obviously about the mission and what we're trying to do. So yeah, please go on the website.
Amazing work. Thank you so much for joining us today, Andrew. It's been great.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
So thank you for tuning into the Privileged Man podcast. If you feel a resonance with our message and are keen to join a globally connected community of men committed to nurturing and elevating their mental wealth, I invite you to explore further. Visit our website, theprivilegedman.com, where you'll find enriching testimonials of men who have become a part of this empowering movement. Remember, the journey to becoming a privileged man, a truly privileged man, one with elevated mental wealth, starts with your next action step. And that step could be just a click away. Thank you again for your time, and I'm looking forward to having you with us in our next episode.